Watch it. May, is that link working?
She may not be back up here.
She's on her own. Okay, that's fine.
All right. Ooh, okay, I think we're ready. Well, I'm so excited that you all are with us this afternoon. I know that I'm really excited for this presentation. Science and data taste great on their own, but our speaker today, Brendan Böhr, believes that a complete meal always includes a full helping of compassion and dignity. Graduating from the Florida Institute of Technology in 2014 with a dual Master of Science degree in Applied Behavior Analysis and Organizational Behavior Management, Brendan now serves as the Chair of Public Relations for the Manitoba Association for Behavior Analysis and is one of, get this, 28 board-certified behavior analysts in Manitoba. Yay, Brendan. His personal interests include unconventional applications of behavior science in topics such as plant behavior, dragonflies, video game consulting, crows, cybernetics, and much more. And if you really want to have an interesting discussion, ask him sometime about plants. He values excellence, creativity, and having a positive community impact. And today he's going to talk a lot about fake news and alternative facts and why people believe things that maybe are a little bit out there. So I'm not going to take up any of his time and turn the mic and screen right over to Brendan.
Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome here. Thank you for joining us. I know there's a couple of you from Winnipeg as well. Represent. It's nice. So thank you for that lovely introduction. I do have a few unusual interests, including crows and plants and cybernetics, and also, not included in that list, ancient Egypt and the history of ancient civilization, which is an interest I've developed only in the last few years. But I've sunk a lot of time into learning about some of this stuff, and some of it has kind of blown my mind. And so that's going to be the kind of the vehicle that I use to present some I think some helpful or some useful information today about how we can be good behavior analysts and be a good member of the community and communicate effectively with others. So we'll see if I can pull off this comparison, because we're going to talk about ancient civilization. So let's start with what we know, right? We're going to start with what we know about the history of civilization, and then some of the basic principles of behavior analysis. All right, so this goes back quite a ways in time, going back, according to this list, all the way 500,000 years ago or so. And that's when we have evidence of human beings using, or humans, and maybe not all Homo sapiens, but members of the human species using fire for heat and cooking. It's a big step towards our modern society. 300,000 years ago, we see in the fossil record evidence of anatomically modern humans. This is when we think there was language being used. We had ceremonial burials. There's also artwork in forms of cave paintings. So there's definitely some good signs of culture at this era. And then around 10,000, so this is all BCE, before the Common Era. So, and then about 10,000 BCE, that's about 12,000 years ago, we start to see evidence of agriculture and domestication. And then 6,000 is when we start to see some of the first cities. And 3000 BCE is when, boom, civilization hits, and largely in, at least initially, in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And then, of course, also in Egypt and Latin America, and in a couple of other spots as well. At the same period of time that civilization starts, that's when we get all this awesome stuff. Like we get the wheel, we get the pottery wheel, which you of course have the wheel first before you can do that. Sailing, writing, bronze working, and of course monumental buildings and structures, and like the biggest things that human beings have ever made. And again, this is the accepted chronology of civilization. Look this up in any textbook. You can maybe even remember some of this from high school or from junior high or whenever we learn about this in school. I don't know. So after 3000 BC, that's of course when civilization began, including ancient Egypt. So we have the Old Kingdom is like the first documented period of ancient Egyptian history. And during the Old kingdom. Of course, there's an old kingdom, middle kingdom, and a new kingdom. During the old kingdom is when we saw the construction of all these, or like the biggest and most massive and most mysterious monolithic structures like ever built. So we get the entire Giza pyramid complex, which includes all the pyramids, the Great Pyramid, which is the coolest and the weirdest one, other pyramids, and of course the Great Sphinx as well, all understood to have been built during this time. Then we have the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BC, the New Kingdom around 1500 BC. This is nearing the end of the Bronze Age now, getting into the beginning of the Iron Age. I just put Ramses II in here because I believe that's the Ramses that's mentioned in the Old Testament. So if you're all familiar with Old Testament stuff, this is when that history kind of picks up. So, you know, there's a lot of history back then. 580, we have the great-grandfather, the great-great-grandfather of Plato visiting Egypt and recording some information about what civilization was like way back in the day, and you know how long civilization has been around, and how long specifically ancient Egypt has been around. It brings that information back to Greece, and Plato writes some of it down, including an account of Atlantis, which I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Atlantis. Actually, let's clear a few things up today. I'm not going to talk about ancient Atlantis, although it's a fascinating thing to look into, and I'm not going to talk about aliens. FYI, I haven't seen a single episode of Ancient Aliens. I'm sure it's very entertaining, but I don't want to mix that in with, you know, legit facts. So none of that stuff. In any case, Plato. So this is around the time that we, many of us start to consider, you know, Western civilization beginning. This is like the high point of classical Greece. Persia conquers Egypt in 525 BC, and then Greece conquers Egypt with Alexander the Great, 332, and then Rome conquers Egypt, and then the Rashidun Caliphate conquers Egypt, and then the Ottomans conquer Egypt, and then while Napoleon was out there trying to conquer Egypt too, they discover the Rosetta Stone, which allowed them to actually translate some of these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So that was a huge point, basically when modern Egyptology began, was with that. On the same expedition, I remember learning somewhere, Napoleon's troops discovered hamsters and brought those back. So you can thank Napoleon for that. And then Britain conquers Egypt, and they didn't say conquered, but they conquered it. I can read history, I know what's going on. And then we have the Kingdom of Egypt starting in 1922, so we're under new management. Of course, it didn't last too long. In sliced bread was developed in 1928, so that's, I would have thrown that in there. 1953 is when we get the Arab Republic of Egypt, which is the current governing body of Egypt. So we can see a full, long history here, going all the way back to 500,000 years ago to just 50 years ago. We can see Egypt has a complex, interesting history. So that's what we know, or that's the standard understood account of ancient civilization. We also have a largely accepted set of principles that relate to human behavior and animal behavior, basically behavior, stuff that behavioral analysts consider to be pretty much baseline foundational truth. Things like observable behavior is the proper subject matter for science. Like, we need to be able to observe it to study it scientifically. Because of that, private events like consciousness, mental images, thoughts, feelings, all that stuff inside that can't be observed, so it's difficult to do science on that, right? We generally understand that the ultimate cause for our actions, why we behave the way that we do, is to be found in the environment. That's things that we can look at, we can observe, we can measure, again, proper domain of science. The cause of behavior is not to be found, or at least it's not the smartest place to look, not the first place to look, that's for sure, in hypothetical constructs and explanatory fictions and things like that. And the good news, well, this is all good news if you like science. If you like applying it, good news is that by focusing on someone's environment, making changes, in terms of antecedents, consequences, things like this, we can achieve very meaningful improvements in quality of life for the people we support. And so that's good. And so because of all this, private events, what's going on in here, not so important. So this is some of the, you know, pretty standard accepted baseline knowledge that behavior analysts generally accept. You might have some argument, but I doubt it. So we have our standard account of history, of civilization. We have our basically standard foundation for behavior analysis. Okay, that's an animated slide. So are there people who disagree with these accounts, with that account of ancient civilization? Are there people who disagree with that account of human behavior, why we behave the way that we do? Yes, of course there are. There definitely are. There are lots. Now, when there are disagreements, so people disagreeing about ancient history or people disagreeing about the causes of behavior, why we behave the way that we do, when there are those disagreements, whose lives are affected by that? Like, does it matter really? Who really bears the consequences of those disagreements? So when we're talking about, we have the history of civilization and behavior analysis, we're talking about the history of civilization. When there's disagreements there, who's affected by that? Largely archaeologists and enthusiasts like me. So not a ton of people, right? Not a, you know, generally schools, teachers, lawmakers aren't going to be super affected by disagreements in the account of ancient history, right? Now, when we're talking about disagreements and developments in behavior analysis, who's affected by disagreements there? Well, lots of people, right? Teachers, parents, everyone we work with, climate change activists, game designers, OBM consultants, right? Everyone who works with human beings and makes a living or has a quality of life that's dependent on the behavior of themselves and others is interested in why we behave the way that we do. And so disagreements about behavior analysis and disagreements about, you know, the sources of our behavior have very wide-ranging consequences. So you can see when I talk about the history of civilization and disagreements there, I'm very awkward and nervous talking about this stuff because I'm going to be introducing some very contrarian perspectives here, like some observations and some ideas that are not commonly understood to be part of archaeology. So that makes me nervous, even though it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Really, it's not going to affect your lives. It's not going to affect the lives of people you support. But when we talk about behavior analysis, this is much more of a big deal. So why are you here attending this presentation about ancient Egypt and basically history of civilization? How is this relevant to our work? That's a very good question if that was in your head, and it likely was. So let's get into it. So I think that there are some lessons that we're going to be able to learn from some of the, I'm calling them mistakes here, and I think that's fair to say, some of the behaviors and mistakes of Egyptologists and dogmatic archaeologists. I think we can learn from some of the mistakes that they've made. So things like, well, just as behaviorism and behavior analysis has its skeptics, people from other disciplines or philosophers or whomever that disagree, of course, archaeology and Egyptology has its skeptics as well. And I think some of the challenges, as I just said, some of the challenges faced by our field by applied behavior analysis, and in particular with respect to dissemination of our science, some of those challenges I think have some similarities to the challenges posed to archaeologists by historical skeptics or by alternative historians or whatever kind of language, pseudo-historians, whatever language you will want to use there. So there's some similarities there. And I think we can learn much from their mistakes. And so we all went to school, we all learned about a pretty standard, accepted, like culturally understood, everyone kind of believes this account of ancient civilization. And yet, when I'm talking about this, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm pulling all this information that I, found on the internet, found on YouTube, and I found in reading books that I pulled out of the library. Thank you, Carly. And so I have all this information, but I'm still feeling really nervous talking about this stuff because it's weird. It's contrarian. And if I feel weird talking about something that doesn't really matter to my peers and colleagues, if I feel weird doing that, there's not really going to be any major consequences here. But just imagine what it might be like for parents or teachers who are trying to get information and have conversations with behavior analysts, with experts in our field about behavior and about these other accounts of behavior that they've read on the internet or they've seen in YouTube videos. I mean, especially if that person has, gotten some degree of training in university or college, and they learned a little bit about science and peer-reviewed evidence, stuff like that. Now they're supporting a family, and they have some questions about their child's behavior, and they know how to do some science, but they didn't go to school for behavior analysis. So they go online and they get all the information they can, but they must feel really awkward bringing that up to experts, to board certified behavior analysts and torch bearers in our field. So today I'm going to try and make us all feel a little bit uncomfortable about our understanding of ancient civilization, and I'm hoping that discomfort will help us to better relate to the people we support and the people that we talk to and communicate with about applied behavior analysis. All right, let's proceed. So I listed a number of learning objectives in the abstract, or along with the abstract. They were a little bit wordy, so I simplified them a bit here. So let's take a look at them. So first learning objective I had: to accept the reality that anybody, including scientifically minded individuals, can reject good science in favor of alternative explanations or even pseudoscience. So what I'm saying here basically is anyone can adopt contrarian beliefs about the world when they are shown weird things, right? And that includes you. Even scientists like you can adopt contrarian, so like out of the ordinary, unorthodox perspectives, views, beliefs when you see weird things. And most of us have not seen a ton of weird things in terms of archaeology. Maybe some of you are attending specifically because you have an interest in this stuff, and that's cool too. So even you can be or can adopt contrarian, unorthodox, weird beliefs. And I'm going to try. I also want to identify some examples of human behavior that can be difficult or awkward to explain. But when we don't do this, or when we don't have a good explanation, or when the people we support feel like they haven't received a good explanation, they may doubt the explanation provided by behavior analysis. And so really what I'm trying to talk about here is, if we avoid difficult topics in applied behavior analysis and instead focus on just easy things to explain, then the social significance of our work is reduced, and it kind of does some damage to the integrity of the leaders of our field as well, who may totally not avoid difficult topics and who might have really good answers. They might be doing the real hard work, but when we avoid those difficult topics and we just leave our lectures and our presentations and our conversations at the very simple things, then that leaves the people we're talking with a big opportunity to question what we've said, because they can look at the world around them and observe things too, and if it doesn't match what we've been telling them, then that's going to reduce the social significance of what we have to say. And basically to behave more compassionately and effectively with the people we support, including those who have alternative explanations of human behavior or who reject outright behavior analysis. Essentially, knowledge translation, talking to people about behavior analysis or about any kind of science, requires perspective taking and humility. And the best teacher of humility is a mind-blowing personal lesson, in my experience. You get your mind blown, that's a good route to being more humble. And so I'm going to try to give you a mind-blowing personal lesson today. We're going to see if I am successful or not. There's so much information about this, about ancient Egypt and Latin American civilizations and Chinese and Indian civilizations. There's so much information out there, so many pictures and videos and YouTube videos. So I tried to pull together information that I feel is respectable, has some good evidence behind it. There's a lot more out there, and mention ancient aliens. There's none of that in here. You can look that up yourself if you want to. But here, let's just get into it. So I have a bunch of pictures here. Now, when people think about ancient Egypt and mysteries about ancient civilizations, often one of the questions they ask is, how did they build the pyramids? How did they build these giant structures of stone? How did they move this, like 2 million or 2.5 million blocks of like several tons each? How did they pile all those stones up on top of each other? And that's a very good question to ask. I'm actually not so interested in that one. I'm much more interested in how they carved certain things and the precision of what they did and how well aligned those pyramids were to true north and other things like this. So those are the examples I'm going to be showing you more of. So this is some mysterious stone boxes they found on the Giza Plateau in the Serapeum structure that it's called. You can see, so this is carved out of stone. You can see it's very right angles, very crisp and clean. When they found these boxes, they were actually hermetically sealed. I mean, I don't know how you can really tell that unless you can go inside and see if there's any air escaping, but that's what they say. So that means perfectly flat surfaces that just mate perfectly, which is pretty impressive. Just zooming in a little bit more here. I'm gonna try not to get too excited as I go through these slides because I find it fascinating and I get pretty energized when I look at this stuff sometimes, maybe to my detriment. More of these pictures, and now we can start to see these hieroglyphics carved on these objects. You can see in this picture how smoothly reflective the surface is. Like some of these stones were polished so well that you could practically see your reflection in them, which is really impressive. And then you see these carvings on top of that, which makes you question what's going on, because you can clearly see the quality of these carvings doesn't match the quality of the object, right? I mean, I'm not a specialist in this area, but I know visual analysis, right? I can look at that. That's not the same. And you can even see like most hard stones, like granite, for example, is actually a composite of other hard stones, like quartz, for example. And when you look at engravings and etchings like this, where you see a line and then it skips in a few spots, that's probably where the stone is getting harder. And so the tool that they were using wasn't hard enough or sharp enough to cut into it. Some more pictures of some of these hieroglyphics on these really highly well-made artifacts. Another picture. This is the same picture, but these are from two different sources, so I cited them separately. Another set of really mind-blowing things. They found thousands and thousands of pots carved out of stone, and including like granite stone, like some of the hardest stone that we know of. How did they carve this with copper chisels and hammers? This is kind of mysterious, right? They hollowed it out from the inside and they're stayed in one piece. And again, it's not like they had a handful of these objects. They found thousands of them. So that's why I have so many pictures. I don't know what this thing is. Looks pretty weird. Looks pretty cool. More stone. I mean, I couldn't imagine going to a stone maker today and asking them to make this. Like, you would need some pretty high-tech equipment. This object, no one knows what this thing is. That's carved out of stone too. Look at that. How do you carve that out of stone? I mean, I can't even comprehend it. But they did it. They carved it out of stone. And all this stuff comes from the Old Kingdom period. So basically, like some of the deepest layers of civilization in terms of archaeology. Same object. More of these pots, again, thousands of them. They look beautiful too, hey? Like they're artistic, they're well made. Tons of these things. Like I said, tons of these things. Look at this one. This one isn't even round. They carved out of stone this weird dish-shaped thing. Like apparently like 2500 or 3000 BC. And here's more of these giant boxes that they've found, often called sarcophagi, but they're really big. Some of them not as big. Again, you can see the engravings. Relatively speaking, like, did they hire, like, so they spent all this work making an amazing precision box, and then they just got, the intern to inscribe the text. It doesn't quite match. It's weird, right? It's just weird to me. And then we get into some even weirder stuff. So try not to get too excited here. This is on the same box that we see right here. Looks like it's part of a latch system when the lid came down on it. But look at that. That's not the work of chisels. That's the work of, like, it looks like a drill, right? Like a power drill. I mean, they clearly didn't have power drills. So, like, it's mysterious. It's weird, right? But, like, more pictures of the same thing. So in this presentation, I'm not going to try and present like a competing theory for all this stuff. What I'm really trying to do is just give an example of why we should maybe be more humble than we are. And anything that happened in the past, I mean, how many kings, how many pharaohs, how many presidents have tried to change history, and how many of them have been successful? Probably lots of them. So how humble should we be about our ancient past? Probably very. So the same box, again, you can see how perfectly cut these things are. This is a lot bigger than it looks too. More of these engravings. Statue, so highly polished, you can almost see yourself in it. Again, they brought these stones to life in a way that we have a difficult time explaining. It's not impossible. I mean, in the like some of this stuff is not impossible. And obviously, human beings did this. In the Michelangelo and in the Renaissance, they made some amazing statues as well. Different activities, though. They didn't make thousands and thousands of granite pots in the Renaissance, right? They didn't build giant monuments that are perfectly aligned to north. Different activities. More statues. Here again, you can see an amazing statue carved. I don't know, like this is alabaster. No, alabaster is white. I don't know what kind of stone this is. I think it's a hard stone. They carved. You can see the ribs on this thing. Like that's how subtle the artwork was here. And then you see these hieroglyphics just carved into the outside. And again, you can see the quality of them is not. It's not matching the quality of those ribs, right? It looks cool. But there's something mysterious about that. Something mismatched, I think. Not the only one. Here's also on the Giza Plateau. There's all kinds of, and I really encourage you guys to look. I actually really want lots of people to go on to YouTube and go onto the internet and look up some of this stuff. So, and then we can have conversations about it at ABAI, and I won't feel like the only crazy person anymore, because I really do feel like the only crazy person about this stuff sometimes. Does this not look like someone had and I'm not saying this is what they had, but like a disc grinder cutting stone? I mean, that's kind of what this looks like here. If you've done I haven't done machining, but any like woodworking or any kind of metalworking at all, you could see some similar kinds of signs. Here, just more really highly machined, like that looks like it's poured cement, right? That's carved stone. Copper chisels. This looks like, I can't really zoom in on here too well, but you can kind of see there are these striations, like they were sawing the stone, like they were machining the stone, like one straight line, and it's perfectly smooth and flat. But you can see these striations, like they had a giant power saw. I'm not saying that's what they had, but it's confusing. And then I see stuff like this all around the Giza Plateau. It's like they're like, let's try this stone. Nah. Let's try this other stone. This one I like more. It's almost like this stuff was easy, so why not? And I'm not saying, again, I'm trying to be humble about this, but it's just mysterious to me. You see how excited I am about this. And so, having seen all these pictures and listened to these accounts and doing some reading, I decided to try this out for myself. Like, let's get a chisel and a hammer, and let's carve some stone and see what it's like. So I go camping in northwestern Ontario. That's in the Canadian Shield. So there's a lot of, it's basically just stone, water, and trees there. So this is me. I was carving for like four hours or something, just hacking away. I tried to find a chisel that was made for granite, which is what this is. Now, not all the stone in ancient Egypt or in Peru, I'm going to show you some pictures there too. Not all that stone was carved out of granite. Some of it's much softer stone, like limestone. But some of it, and including like the core of the Great Pyramid, is carved out of giant granite blocks, some of the hardest material on Earth. And that's what the Canadian Shield is made out of as well. It's a different kind of granite, but it's very hard. So I thought, let's try this. So I went to every store, like every hardware store. I talked to every big art store in Winnipeg, which isn't the biggest city on Earth, but I tried to find a chisel that was made for carving stone like this. And I couldn't find, nobody has it at all. So the best thing I got was a concrete chisel made of hardened steel, which the ancient Egyptians definitely didn't have. They had copper tools and bronze. Iron came much later, and steel came much later after that. So that I used hardened steel chisel to do this. I mean, in my right hand is just a stone. So, I compromised there. But after like 4 hours of trying to carve just a little heart in the stone, I went into the dark as well. That chisel is, and I wish I brought it. I forgot it at home today. It's like destroyed. Like it was sharp to start with, and it was just worn down to a nub. It was kind of easy going in the beginning carving this thing, but very quickly got dull, and then the rest of it took forever to do, and it was not as precise as I was hoping. This is the end product, though. It's a heart. It actually points towards the sort of, if you're interested, it points towards the sunset during May long weekend. So I could go back there every year, and that's going to be pointed exactly at where the sun sets when I'm there at May long. It's kind of cool, and it felt fun doing this. I was imagining, being like living the life of one of our ancestors, looking up at the night sky and seeing like this beautiful perfection up there, and then down on Earth, everything is messy and dirty, and I want to create something that's stable and permanent here too. I can kind of imagine that impulse. And so when I was carving this, my arms got sore and exhausted, and I had to wear my sunglasses because I didn't think about having safety goggles. I wonder what the ancient Egyptians did about that, because definitely had a couple of like blood marks on me from those chips hitting my face. Actually, it's kind of a neat experience. Poured some water on it. This is how it looks in context. So after that experience of using this hardened steel chisel and taking, again, I didn't write it down, but it was at least 4 hours. It was probably significantly longer than 4 hours. I was working at this. After that experience, I was like, I'm going to go online and order a carbide tipped chisel. That's what I got here. Got this from Ukraine diamond tools. I'm like, hey, next time I'm going to get a diamond tipped one. This time it's just going to be carbide, which is definitely not a material that the ancient Egyptians had. But I can't wait till summer arrives and I can go back out there and carve something into the stone that's going to last 1,000 years. Maybe. Wouldn't that be cool? It sounds cool. All right, carried away here. That's the one there. Back to ancient Egypt. So more curiosities here. And so part of the ideas of what people are suggesting might account for some of these unusual, mysterious discrepancies here is maybe human civilization was a little bit, extended a little bit longer into our past than what we commonly understand today. And certainly if you ask the ancient Egyptians back at any period, either the Old Kingdom to the New Kingdom, ask them how long their civilization has been around, and they will say it's been there for 10,000 years, and they have like a chronology of all the kings. Of course, we disregard all of that, but it's an interesting thing that they thought that their civilization extended so much farther into the past than we do now. And so this idea is maybe there was civilization older than we are aware of, and maybe they had ways of working stone that we don't understand yet. I'm not talking about lasers and airplanes, but some way of doing this that we just don't really understand. Like copper chisels doesn't really explain it to me. So this is another one of these curious objects with a weird looking like drill hole in it. And there's lots of examples of drill cores. I could talk about that for half an hour. I'm going to try and move through this here. Drill cores, fascinating. I'm going to leave it there for now. Other things like paving stones. We're going to start getting into some really cool like masonry now. These stones, as you can see, there's no mortar in between them. Like you go back into medieval Europe, all of those castles, all of those buildings had mortar in between. So they carved stone too, obviously. They piled them on top of each other, obviously, but they didn't mate 100% perfectly. So they had to use some kind of a mortar in between. But a hallmark of the oldest civilizations that we know of, all of them, a hallmark is that they didn't use mortar at all. Instead, they cut all their stones, I shouldn't say all their stones, but stones like this, to such perfect precision that they just fit together. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. This is paving stones, I think still in the Giza Plateau. Some more of these things. So people look at the pyramid and they marvel at it. They should look down too, because the pyramid was built on giant stone blocks, and you're walking on giant stone blocks, and that was carved and moved there amazingly. Curious or an interesting fact, sometime in the, I don't remember, I'm not going to guess what era this is, sometime between 1000 and 1500, I think, there was a prince, an Arab prince, I don't know what to call him, but anyway, like a king, who was like, these pyramids are no good, let's destroy them. And he ordered some people to destroy this one. This is not the largest one, this is one of the smaller ones. Menkaure, the pyramid of Menkaure, Menakre, I can't pronounce these things. And they tried their hardest to destroy it. They had cannons, and they, tried to pull apart themselves, and this is as far as they got. Just cut this gash in the side. So these are giant, these are big, serious objects. This is the top of the Great Pyramid, which is, because the whole pyramid was originally covered in stones that have since been harvested and used to build. Largely, Cairo has been built out of those stones. They just harvested old stones from existing monuments, which is a global practice everywhere. But on the Great Pyramid, you can see some of it still remains. Some of that casing stone still remains up at the top. So that's where this is. You zoom in, you can see that this is much, like, very precision work. Of course, it's old too, right? Who knows how many of Napoleon's soldiers took a pot shot at this thing? I don't know. Zooming in even more. All of these stones, or all the rest of those stones, the ones that are missing, are of course gone. This is what the Great Pyramid looks like. All of these names, of course, are made up because there's no hieroglyphics written in the pyramid anywhere. There's none written on the outside of the pyramid either, which is really weird because they wrote on everything. Like there's Egyptian hieroglyphics written on like walls and obelisks and everything, but not in the greatest pyramid. It's weird, right? They called these things the Great Chamber or the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, but they didn't find any mummies in the Great Pyramid. There's none of that. I could talk more about this, but I gotta keep moving on here. This is some of the stone, I think also on the Menkaure pyramid there. You can see again that this is of the outer layer of stones. And not only are they fit precisely together, but they're not uniform size either. There's an interesting interesting construction method going on here that we don't use today, that's for sure. All of our bricks and blocks are the same uniform size. So what were they doing back then? It must have been harder, not easier. There they are again. And look at some of these, some of them have these, get my laser pen out here. Some of them have these little bulges that stick out, right? You can see that. Keep that in mind. That's more of this stuff. Now, more of these Egyptian structures and walls. You can see how well all these pieces are fit together. You can't slide a credit card in between. They're perfectly cut, and they're not small blocks either. They're giant ones. This is a corner. Now, when most of us think about making a corner in a building or in Lego or in anything, we put a wall or a block, and then you put another block right next to it, and that's your corner, right? But not these guys. These guys made their walls like this. So they carved, you can see they carved these stones, so part of the turn is in the stone itself. See more examples of this. The stone itself, like, that's a lot more work, but it makes it last a lot longer. It makes it much more earthquake proof, right? And so the ancient Egyptians did lots of this. Very curious, very just amazing stuff. You couldn't find modern, you maybe could with all of our forklifts and giant machines, we could do something like this, but certainly between the Old Kingdom and modern era, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm not the only one who's saying this. Experts are like, we don't know how they did this. It's not just me. Now we're starting to look at Latin America. So this is Incan civilization. And there's a lot of weird similarities there too. So you can see their masonry had stone blocks fitted together, nothing in between. I mean, there's you can't fit a credit card in between, and there's no mortar as well with some of these bigger blocks here. Now, what's really curious, well, here, remember those bulges? We see a lot of those in South America as well, which is interesting. Some people say there could be some civilizational, like, common ancestor or something, but that would push civilization back way farther. Like, and I'm not even going to go there. I don't know how anyone will explain that. There's some different continents, but there's some visually striking similarities. And so, again, going back to this idea that, you know, the standard account of history is basically a straight line. You know, we start and low civilization, low technology, and we go it's not a perfectly straight line, but it's a pretty straight line up until our modern era. So then it's so weird when we can go back into the oldest strata in civilization and find some of the best stonework and some of the best, largest objects and most precisely carved things that the world has ever seen. And it's like technology started higher, or at least stoneworking technology started higher. It's been declining like ever since. It's kind of what it seems like. And so when they say that the Inca made everything in South America, that raises some more very interesting questions, because you can go down there, and I haven't gone down there. I've just seen lots of pictures and videos. You can clearly see in those differences in building quality. And I got to start speeding up here. Like here, you can see there are stones just piled on top of each other, and then there are carved bricks that fit together perfectly. Here's some of these amazing walls. Like this, the conquistadors wrote back, like when they came and erased everything, bastards. But when they wrote back to King or Queen Isabella, saying like, this is the finest craftsmanship on the earth, like way greater than anything in the Vatican or in ancient Rome. That's what they wrote back. And they tried to destroy as much of it as they could. They couldn't destroy everything because it's built so well. But you can see differences in construction quality, almost like there was an old civilization that had some crazy mastery of stone, and then something wiped them out, and then another civilization kind of took over. It's kind of what it looks like, but the newer civilization didn't know how to build walls and structures the way that the older ones did. That's kind of what it looks like, right? Here's more of these. So these are big blocks. They're not small. So imagine just carving them perfectly and then fitting them on top of each other. And if it's not quite perfect, we got to lift it up again and then fix it and then lower it again and keep doing that. There's crazy explanations for how they did this stuff. I'm not even going to repeat them because there's no evidence behind them. We just don't know how this was done. Of course, people were observing how amazing this stuff was back in the day too. Did some amazing artwork. Now I got to speed up a little bit, but now going to Lebanon, the Temple of Baalbek, B-A-L-B-A-K, which was a temple that lots of archaeologists say the Romans constructed, but when we look at it, it seems much more likely that the Romans built on top of an existing, much older temple or something, which is how most civilizations have built most religious structures in history, including Christian civilizations too, often building a church on top of what was once a pagan religious site. Even some of the greatest churches, like Peter's Basilica, was built on top of an ancient pagan site as well, partly to kind of neutralize the stuff. And so for the Romans to do that would not have been a stretch. And when we look at it, that's a different question. You could see differences in block size as well, kind of indicating that maybe there were two civilizations here as well. Look at the size of these blocks. What kind of civilization wants to, like, you could do the same thing in 100 small blocks, which are still too big. They only recently, so there's the top block there that's called Stone of the Pregnant Mother. They've named these stones. You can see how big that is. They didn't finish carving it out. And then right beside it, they only recently discovered, like a few years ago, this second block that's even larger. It's just bafflingly big, some of these other blocks. And here you can see giant blocks underneath and smaller blocks on top, almost like there was one civilization that could build with giant blocks, and then the Romans came and built their amazing things too. I'm not putting down any civilizations. I'm very impressed with all of them. Most of them. I'm not even going to get into Petra. Petra is a whole nother ballgame as well. I mean, this is carved purely out of stone. I'm not even going to touch ancient Egypt, or sorry, ancient India, carving entire temples out of one solid piece of rock. Mind-blowing. The accounts of this, copper chisels don't do it. Not enough. Gotta have something like this, carbide tipped. I'm gonna spray paint this gold, by the way, because I think it deserves to be gold. So here's a question. What size of catastrophe would be needed to destroy our civilization today? So Randall Carlson is a geologist and a specialist in like ancient climate. And he made a series of illustrations, or he gave a presentation. I don't think he illustrated these, but someone else did, but this is from his presentation. We all remember Hurricane Katrina. That was devastating for New Orleans. We can consider that to be like level 1 catastrophe. Then we can imagine something that's 10 times as large, so 1 order of magnitude greater. That would be something that could destroy 10 major cities on Earth. So that's a huge thing, right? We can imagine something that's 2 order of magnitudes bigger, something like this that would destroy 100 major cities on Earth. Now, that's something that civilization could possibly recover from, but it would have to be something so massive that would destroy 100 cities. But let's go even a step past that. What's a catastrophe that would destroy 1,000 modern major cities? So we can imagine a level 3 catastrophe. We know those have happened in ancient history. This is ancient history, also still from Randall Carlson. You can see the present, and then modern humans way back then. The present, written, recorded history is only so long, or known history. But he's done the hard work of mapping out all of the catastrophes that have happened on Earth since anatomically modern humans, and he's got tons of them. And these are huge things. Like these are all at that level 3 order of magnitude or more. And so there's a lot of extinction events going on here, including the Toba super eruption caused the near extinction of humans. But what's interesting about this is this question of how far back in time do we need to go before we experience some of these catastrophes? And could civilization have possibly begun and then been destroyed by a catastrophe? We look at the ending of the Ice Age, which is really like 12,000 years ago, 15 maybe, like not that long ago. And if 10,000 years ago or 10,000 BC is like agriculture, it seems reasonable to me that there could have been at least a few cities before that time. I don't know if that's the case, but if there was, they're gone now. Whatever knowledge they had, we don't know it. So actually looking a little bit closer, this is what we have going back years before present. So at this 5,000 mark, this would be like civilization. We have early cities over here. We have use of fire way back on the other side. And then we can see the Younger Dryas period. I'm not going to get into this whole stuff, but you can just see global climate change acting in a dramatic way. And we're probably rightly concerned about climate change today, but compare it to just the last 10,000, 15,000 years, there hasn't been much movement in recorded history, right? Another graph showing essentially the same thing. I tried to put some citations in here. Also, going back into ancient history, we know that the sea level has risen and fallen significantly. So even going back just 16 or 8,000 years ago, we could start to see that Europe would have looked very, very different with the sea level like 300 or 350 feet below what it is today. You could walk from France to Ireland. And so we know civilization tends to always grow around coastlines and rivers. Whatever was there is definitely gone now. It's all underwater, right? So more things that are just interesting and curious and just kind of weird, right? And then we get into the Sphinx, and I've got to say it like 100 times. The Sphinx is old. The Sphinx is really old. According to the standard timeline, it was built around 2500 BCE. But we can look at it and be like, this has suffered some major erosion. And more than looking at the Sphinx itself, we can look at the enclosure that it was built in. So when they built the Sphinx, they dug into the rock, and then they built the Sphinx in that hole, and it extends above, obviously. But they dug a little enclosure. And they have restored the Sphinx many times in history, but nobody has bothered to restore the walls of that enclosure. And you can see how much erosion has occurred there. And if you listen to guys like Randall Carlson and a few other geologists, they look at this and they say, this is very clearly the sign of water erosion, like of rain and water. This is not wind. Wind forms bands and striations. Water forms lines like this. And how long ago since it was wet in Egypt? Like 12,000 years ago. So interesting, weird stuff, right? Okay, wrapping it up now. Conclusion and relevance. Why do we care about this? So I have a few points I want to make here. Egyptologists and expert archaeologists that adhere to that standard narrative that our culture has understood and accepted for a while now. Like so many domains or so many areas for science to look at, it might take a multidisciplinary approach to really understand what's going on. And so when we have just archaeologists looking at something, they might miss those, the water erosion patterns, right? Likewise, if just geologists look at it, they might miss how complex and precise some of those carvings were. The Great Pyramid, by the way, is aligned to the north, to true north, more accurately than the Greenwich Observatory, which was built like in modern times to, for the meridian lines around the Earth. So when I think about that, and people that are skeptical of the standard Egyptological account and ancient civilization account, they'll often say, like, that's because these Egyptologists that's one discipline. You need to have multiple disciplines going in there. So when I compare that to applied behavior analysis, I think we could say a very similar thing. Is human behavior the domain of just behavior analysts? Just looking at behavior is really the only thing we need to look at? Or is there also hormones involved? Is there also sleeping, which is behavior too, but the effects of sleeping? There's the immune system. There's so many other aspects of what a human being is. And when behavior analysts, when we make statements that kind of have the effect of claiming that all you need is us, we can explain everything, we're making a similar mistake to, I think, what some of these Egyptologists have been making, and at our peril, because we don't want to foster the development of anti-ABA group the way that there are standard Egyptology groups out there now. You can see a lot of this in-group, out-group stuff saying all those Egyptologists, all those archaeologists, they're all the same. They're all, in their ivory tower. We don't want to make the same mistake. Speaking of the ivory tower problem, applied behavior analysis. I mean, I should have a citation for this, I apologize, but I think some of you can recall. A report came out some time ago showing that the publications of behavior analysts are much more likely to be published in behavior analytic journals and not outside. So we're becoming more insular, more ivory tower. That's a mistake, and that's something that Egyptologists are potentially doing as well. Focusing on, I'll quickly show you something. Flinders Petrie is widely understood to be like the first scientific Egyptologist in the 1800s. He had some cool things to say about multidisciplinary approach. He says, I'm going to read everything here, but basically he's saying here that parts of ancient Egypt are going to appeal to students. Parts of it are going to appeal to geologists. Parts are going to appeal to mechanically minded individuals, right? But I should read the whole thing. The practical man who may follow the instrumental details may consider the discussion of historical problems to be outside his province, while only those familiar with mechanical work will fully realize the questions of workmanship and tools here explained. An investigation thus based on such different subjects is not only at a disadvantage in its reception, but also in its production. And if one part or another, if in one part or another, specialists may object to some result or suggestion, the plea must be on the difficulty of making certain how much is known and what is believed on subjects so far apart and so much debated. The combination of two apparently distinct subjects is often most fertile in results, and the mathematical and mechanical study of antiquities promises a full measure of success. So we need a multidisciplinary approach to understand ancient civilizations, and we need a multidisciplinary approach to understand human beings and human behavior. So we need to work together and be part of a team. We're not going to be replacing SLPs. We need to be working with them and so on. And if we don't, we stand the risk of people seeing less value in what we have to provide. Focusing on easy solutions, I mean, it's easy to say 1 million slaves built the pyramids, right? And recently they don't think it was slaves, it was paid people now. Easy answers like, well, these giant monuments must have been tombs because, these were primitive religious people. That's the only thing they could have built. It's probably just giant tombs. That's what they were interested in. That's an easy answer, right? But I think it might be too easy. What are other examples that I had here? Using technical, and so some of the things that we do as behavior analysts is we often pick easy things to explain to. We pick easy explanations. We pick using technical terms instead of trying to use relatable terms just because it's easier for us to talk the way we talked in school. And to ignore private events the same way that I think, or at least the way it appears that some archaeologists are ignoring some of these unusual and mysterious out-of-place objects. And so when we are supporting someone, we're communicating with the public, we need to make sure that we are we're not just ignoring parts that are really important to everyone. We need to talk about what's going on inside. We need to talk about people's values. We need to talk about neurodiversity and things like this. And we need to be multidisciplinary and inclusive of others who have perspectives as well. Because at the end of the day, people who are interested in ancient Egypt is a very small number of people, right? So there's not going to be a ton of experts that are going to be disagreeing with the standard account. Whereas in behavior analysis, everybody is a human being. Everybody behaves. Everybody has their own perspective, or at least their own, everybody can observe behavior, and everybody can therefore come to their own conclusions and challenge what we're trying to say. So we have to make sure that our message is relevant to what they have to say, and we're using real examples that people care about, and we're not ignoring or downplaying the difficult stuff. So before I wrap up, because it's pretty much time to go here, so I cited other sources as well, but a lot of the pictures I used came from these two, Brian Forrester and Ben. Ben, I don't know his last name. He introduces himself as Ben. He's got lots of really great footage online. I encourage you to check him out. And that's where I'm going to wrap this up today. So thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope there was some value in this. I mean, I know that it's a bit of an unusual thing. It's a little bit shy talking about this because, it's easier to talk about the standard narrative, the standard accepted account of civilization. But as scientists, if we're trying to, live out the values that scientists should have, then we should be skeptical of pretty much anything, especially if the majority accepts it as true. And we can learn a lot from these Egyptologists and other expert archaeologists and be more inclusive of other people who have a lot to say too. So thank you, everybody. Please do follow that link Megan has shared, and hope to see you all again soon. Hope to talk about this at ABAI. Well, what do I do now?
No, you're good.